The dust of the valley road was a second skin for Hale Orvin, a fine ochre shroud that settled in the creases of his eyes and the permanent bend of his neck. He walked with his gaze fixed on the earth ahead of his worn boots, as if charting a course through the planet's crust, seeking a seam he might slip through and vanish. The sun was a hammer on his back, the same sun that baked the clay fields of the Orso Valley into a cracked mosaic, the same sun that bleached the picket fences of the town of Viridian to the color of bone. The people of Viridian saw the hunch of his shoulders and read apology. They saw the silence of his mouth and heard insolence. He was the farmhand from the outlying acreage of a man named Silas Croft, a creature of loam and manure, who appeared on the seventh day to purchase salt and flour, his coin placed carefully on the counter, his eyes never lifting to meet another's. They called him Hunched Hale, the Croft Mute. The children, braver and crueler, would sometimes trace the shape of his spine in the air with a mocking finger, their laughter like the scatter of dried peas on a wood floor. He never reacted. His stillness was a rock against which their taunts broke and dissolved. His back, beneath the sweat-stiffened canvas of his shirt, was a landscape of its own, a testament written in keloid and scar, ridges of old pain that mapped a history no one in Viridian cared to read. They were the brand of a past he had walked away from, or been cast out of, arriving in the valley years ago as little more than a whisper, a shadow seeking a place to thicken and settle. Silas Croft, a man whose heart was as fallow as his northern fields, had given him work and a bed of straw in the loft of the main barn, not out of kindness, but because Hale's silence was cheap and his capacity for labor seemed bottomless. Hale asked for nothing more. The company of horses was preferable to the company of men. Their breath was warm and honest, their judgment simple. They did not care for the stories etched into his skin. They cared only for the rhythmic pull of the curry comb, the steady measure of oats in a pail. On this day, the last Sunday of the harvest month, the air was different. It was thick, holding its breath. The sky, usually a pale, washed-out blue, was bruised with a sullen gray that pressed down on the valley, muffling sound. A storm was coming, not the cleansing, silver rains of spring, but a dry, violent tantrum of late summer. Heat lightning had flickered on the horizon for 2 nights straight, silent arguments in the heavens. Now, the argument was descending. Hale felt it in the hollow of his bones, a familiar ache that preceded the world's convulsions. He was leading the mule, laden with supplies, back towards the Croft farm. The town of Viridian was emptying into the white spire of the First Valley Church. It was the day of the Sermon of the Chimes, an annual tradition where the children were given small brass bells to ring at the sermon's crescendo, a cacophony of tinny praise meant to reach the ears of a distant god. He could hear the thin, discordant music even from the edge of town, a sound that snagged on something deep inside him, a memory of other bells, silent ones. He tugged the mule's lead, urging it faster. The road shimmered. The air tasted of ozone and scorched dust. The first peal of thunder was not a rumble, but a crack, as if the sky itself had split open. The mule shied, its eyes wide and white. Hale placed a hand on its neck, his calloused palm a small anchor in the rising storm. He did not speak, but the animal quieted under his touch, trusting the scarred man's stillness. From the Croft rise, the town was a miniature below, the church its stark white heart. He watched as the sky turned the color of a deep plum. The world held its breath, waiting, and then it came. Not rain. A bolt of lightning, jagged and blindingly white, a nerve ripped from the spine of the storm. It did not strike the hills or the fields. It struck the steeple. For a half-second, the cross at its peak became a thing of pure, incandescent light, a burning brand against the bruised sky. Then darkness, followed by a sound that was not thunder, but a deep, guttural whoomp, the sound of old, dry wood surrendering to impossible heat. A tongue of orange flame licked out from the belfry window. Then another. Smoke, black and greasy, began to pour from the eaves. Hale stood frozen on the rise, the mule's lead slack in his hand. The distant panicked ringing of the children's bells was swallowed by a new sound. A roar, the sound of a beast awakening. Down in Viridian, the church doors burst open. Figures spilled out, small and dark against the growing light of the fire, their screams too thin to carry on the wind. They scattered like ants from a disturbed hill, faces turned upward in horror. They ran from the burning house of their god, their prayers turned to shrieks. Hale did not move. His eyes were fixed on the inferno. The heat was a living thing, reaching for him even at this distance, a shimmering wave that distorted the air. He saw the townsfolk clustering at a safe distance, their faces pale ovals of terror. He saw the preacher, a man named Alaric, on his knees in the street, his hands clasped to his head. They were all outside, all of them, but the fire was inside. The fire was devouring the pews, the hymnals, the sacred silence. It was a hunger he understood. Something inside him, a thing long dormant and buried under years of silence and shame, broke loose. It was not a thought. It was an impulse, primal and absolute. The mule forgotten, he began to run, not away, towards. His hunched form straightened, his long legs eating up the dry earth of the road. He ran against the current of his own life, against the years of downcast eyes and averted gazes. The townspeople, huddled together, saw him coming, a lone figure charging towards the pyre. A few shouted, their words lost in the fire's escalating roar. They thought him a fool, a madman running to his death. They did not know what he saw. He saw the gate again, the gate of the gray school, its iron bars cold even in the summer sun. He saw the wagon that had brought them, the small faces peering through the slats, their eyes wide with a fear that had no language the men with the steel keys would understand. He had stood there just outside the gate, his own tongue a traitor in his mouth, translating the clipped, harsh commands of the schoolmaster into the soft, sibilant sounds of their home tongue, the one they were being brought here to forget. Be still. Be silent. It is for your own good. Lies. He had been their bridge to damnation, and his payment had been a place to sleep and the gnawing acid of his own complicity. He remembered the feel of the gate under his hand, the cold, unyielding iron. He had not opened it, but he had not barred it either. He had simply stood and watched them be led inside. Now a different door stood before him, a door of fire. The main entrance to the church was a gaping maw of flame and smoke. The heat was a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs, blistering his skin. The roar was deafening, a symphony of destruction. He wrapped the hem of his canvas shirt over his mouth and nose and plunged inside. The world dissolved into a vision of hell. The air was a thick, searing soup of smoke and ash. Pews were blazing pyres, the varnish bubbling and screaming. The stained glass windows depicting serene saints and gentle lambs were shattering from the heat, raining down shards of colored glass like jewels of agony. Above, the great wooden beams of the ceiling groaned, heavy with fire. He could not see, he could not breathe. He could only feel. The heat was a presence, a weight. But beneath the roar, he heard it. A small sound, a whimper. He moved toward it, stumbling over a fallen hymnal rack. His eyes, streaming, made out a shape huddled beneath a pew near the front, shielded from the worst of the direct flame, but surrounded. A child. A small girl with hair the color of wheat, her face streaked with soot and tears. She was clutching one of the small brass bells, her knuckles white. She looked at him, her eyes wide, not with the fear of the fire, but with a terrible, clear recognition. He knew that look. He had seen it through the slats of the wagon. He did not speak. There were no words. He swept her up into his arms. She was terrifyingly light, Her small body was rigid with shock. He turned, his back taking the brunt of a wave of heat from a collapsing section of the balcony. The scars there, old and silver, felt as if they were reopening, weeping fire. He navigated the treacherous landscape of flame and falling debris by instinct, his body remembering a pain it knew how to endure. He burst back out into the open air, a grotesque pietà of soot and salvation. He did not stop. He strode through the stunned crowd of townspeople, laid the girl on the grass far from the church, and turned to go back in. "Hale! Stop! It's suicide!" Silas Croft's voice, rough and unfamiliar in its panic. Hale did not hear him. He heard only the silence of the gate, the debt he owed. He went in a second time. The smoke was thicker now, blacker. The oxygen was nearly gone. He crawled this time, his hands and knees scraping over hot floorboards and shattered glass. He found 2 more. Twin boys, no older than 7, huddled together in the vestry, their hands clasped. Their faces, when they saw him, were blank masks of terror, but their eyes, dark and deep, held the same flicker of knowing. He had seen them at the gray school, their hair shorn, their bright sashes replaced with drab gray wool. He hauled one onto his back, the boy's arms wrapping around his neck in a desperate grip, and cradled the other against his chest. This exit was harder. A beam fell, trailing sparks, blocking his path. He veered left, through the choir stalls, the wood hot enough to scorch the leather of his boots. He emerged again into the shocked silence of the crowd, a monster from a furnace, leaving 2 more children on the cool grass before the fire tried to claim him again. His lungs were burning, his shirt was smoldering, his face was a mask of soot, his hair singed, the skin on his arms was blistering. But there was a count in his head, a tally. He had seen their faces at the school. He knew how many there were. There were 5. Not from Viridian, but from the outlying hills, the last of the families who spoke the old tongue, forced by law to send their children to be educated. 5 small souls delivered to the place of silent bells. He had helped condemn 5. He would retrieve 5. The 3rd trip was a descent into madness. The church was no longer a building. It was a throat of fire. The roof was beginning to sag, shedding flaming shingles like dragon scales. The roar was absolute. He could feel the structure dying around him. He did not think he would come back out. A strange peace settled over him. This was a fitting pyre, a good place for a man like him to end. He crawled deeper, shouting now, his voice a raw, useless bark. He found them near the altar, behind the stone font, as if seeking sanctuary in the very heart of the thing that was consuming them. 2 more. A boy, older than the others, and a girl, the youngest of all, barely more than a toddler. The boy Kaelin had wrapped his own body around the girl, Lirael, trying to shield her. His eyes, when they met Hale's through the swirling smoke, were not afraid. They were cold, with an ancient anger. Kaelin had been the one who had spat at him at the school gate. Hale had no strength left to carry them both. He motioned to the boy, a gesture toward the door. Kaelin shook his head, refusing to leave the girl. Hale understood. He picked up the small girl, her body limp, and tucked her inside his shirt, against his burned chest. He then grabbed Kaelin's arm, hauling him to his feet. "Go," he rasped, the first word he had spoken in what felt like a lifetime. It was a sound like stones grinding together. Kaelin hesitated. Then, seeing the look in Hale's eyes, a look that promised he would follow, the boy turned and ran, a small, sure-footed shadow darting through the chaos towards the light. Hale followed, shielding the child against his body. The world was tilting. The great bell in the steeple, its supports burned away, tore loose with a shriek of tortured metal. It crashed down through the burning roof, through the floor of the belfry, and smashed into the nave of the church, bringing a cascade of fire and timber down with it. The force of the impact threw Hale forward. He landed hard, the air knocked from him, the small body of the girl a fragile treasure against his own. He was pinned. A heavy beam lay across his legs. Pain, white-hot and absolute, shot up his spine. He could see the doorway, a distant rectangle of safety. He could hear the screams of the town. He was going to die here. The debt would be paid in full. He closed his eyes, the smell of burning pine and his own scorched flesh filling his senses. But then, a hand on his shoulder, small but strong. Kalen. The boy had come back. He was pulling at the beam, his face a grimace of effort, his bare feet dancing on the hot floorboards. He couldn't move it. He looked at Hale, his expression changing from anger to something else. Desperation. He shouted something, not in the language of Viridian, but in the old tongue. A string of sharp, fluid sounds, a command, an appeal. Hale did not know where the strength came from. Perhaps from the boy's voice, a sound from the life he had betrayed. He pushed. With a guttural roar that tore from the deepest part of him, he shifted his body, leveraging the beam just enough. Kalen pulled again, and his legs came free. Agony flared in his left leg, but he ignored it. He got to his knees, clutching the girl, Lirael. Kalen grabbed his hand, and together, the man, the boy, and the unconscious child staggered the last few feet, emerging from the collapsing church, just as the roof caved in entirely, sending a mushroom cloud of sparks and ash into the storm-darkened sky. Hale fell to his knees on the grass, gently laying the girl down beside the others. The 5 of them. All accounted for. He had done it. The debt was... He couldn't finish the thought. The world went soft and gray at the edges. The faces of the townspeople swam before him, mouths open in awe. He saw Silas Croft, his weathered face streaked with tears. He saw the preacher, Alaric, staring at him as if he were an angel risen from the pit. He heard a word float on the air, whispered at first, then spoken aloud. Hero. The word was a brand, hotter than the fire. He looked at the 5 children, all conscious now, sitting in a silent row on the grass. They were not looking at the burning church. They were not looking at the weeping townsfolk. They were all looking at him. And in their eyes, he saw no heroism. He saw memory. He saw the gate. He saw the traitor who had, for a reason they could not yet comprehend, walked through fire to undo a single moment of his past. The world finally went black. He woke to the smell of lye soap and lavender. He was in a bed, a real bed with clean sheets, the likes of which he had not known in years. Sunlight, soft and morning new, streamed through a window. His body was a universe of pain. Every inch of him was bandaged or salved. He tried to sit up, and a bolt of agony from his leg sent him back down with a gasp. A woman he recognized as Ilara, the healer, bustled into the room. "Easy now," she said, her voice gentle. "You lie still. The Lord was with you, Hale Orvin. With you and those children." Hale said nothing. He turned his head and saw his burned, tattered clothes folded on a chair, his identity, his shield. He felt naked without them, exposed. "The whole town is talking," Ilara continued, changing a dressing on his arm with practiced hands. "They're calling you the guardian of Viridian. Preacher Alaric is already planning a sermon in your honor, once we can rebuild." She smiled at him, a warm, genuine smile. "You're a hero, Hale." The word landed on him like a stone. He closed his eyes. Hero was a lie. A bright, shining costume they wanted him to wear to cover the soot-stained truth of what he was. He had not saved them out of love for Viridian or its god. He had saved them out of a selfish, desperate need to balance a scale only he could see. The days that followed were a strange fever dream. People came to the door of the healer's small cottage to see him. They brought gifts, a jar of honey, a freshly baked loaf of bread, a carved wooden bird. They stood by his bedside, their voices hushed with reverence, telling him what he had done, as if he hadn't been there. They painted the scene with colors of bravery and self-sacrifice, colors he did not recognize. Silas Croft came, hat in his hands, and told Hale the barn loft was no longer his place. A small, dry cottage on the edge of the Croft land, unused for years, was being made ready for him. "It's the least I can do," Silas had mumbled, his eyes full of a respect Hale found suffocating. He healed slowly. The burns on his back and arms became new, angry scars laid over the old, pale ones. His leg had been broken, set crudely but effectively by Alara. He would walk with a limp now, another feature to add to the hunched back and the downcast eyes. He remained silent through it all. His silence, once a mark of his strangeness, was now interpreted by the town as humility, the quiet strength of a true hero. They filled his silence with their own narratives, their own need for a miracle. But the children did not come. He saw them sometimes, from his window. They were housed together in the preacher's home for the time being. He would see them in the garden, a small, contained unit. They did not play with the other children of the town. They kept to themselves, 5 small figures moving with a quiet purpose, and they watched him. Whenever he was near the window, he would feel their eyes on him, not with the adoration of the townsfolk. It was a heavy, measuring gaze, the gaze of judges. He moved into the cottage as soon as he could walk, leaning heavily on a crude crutch. It was small, 2 rooms with a hearth. It was more than he had ever had. It felt like a cage. The town's gratitude was a pressure, a constant expectation. He was no longer invisible. He was a landmark. People nodded to him on the road now, smiled. "Morning, Hale." "God bless you, Hale." Each greeting was a cinder in his soul. He took to working at night, tending to the Croft animals in the dark, seeking the anonymity of the moon and stars. He began to let the soot and dirt of his work cling to him again, a welcome layer of grime to obscure the hero the town saw. He ate little, his body fueled by a restless energy that gave him no peace. It was in the evenings that he first heard it. A soft sound, carried on the breeze from the direction of the preacher's house. A melody. It was not a hymn from the Viridian church. It was a strange, winding tune, full of microtones and odd rhythms that spoke of open spaces and ancient sorrows. And then, the voices, the children. They were singing, and they were singing in the old tongue. The language he had been ordered to help erase, the language that had been forbidden at the Grey School on pain of punishment. The sounds of it struck him with the force of a physical blow. He sat on the stone stoop of his cottage, the night cool around him, and listened. He understood every word. They were not songs of praise or thanks. They were songs of memory. They sang of the whispering grasslands, of the sky-stone mountains, of the river of no name. They sang the stories of their people, the stories the Grey School was meant to burn out of them. Their voices were thin but clear, weaving together in the twilight, a quiet act of reclamation, of defiance. He had not heard the tongue spoken with such freedom since he was a boy himself, before he had been taken, before he had learned the language of Viridian, before he had become a tool for the very people who had destroyed his own world. He had been chosen as a translator at the school because he was one of them, but one of them who had already been broken, who had learned to survive by forgetting. Hearing them sing now was both a balm and a torment. The language was alive. They had kept it, hidden in their hearts, a secret seed waiting for the right moment to sprout. The fire had been that moment. In the crucible of the church, their shared trauma had burned away the fear, burned away the conditioning of the school. They had emerged not as frightened children of Viridian, but as the children of the Skystone, their identities forged anew in the flames. And he, their rescuer, was also their betrayer. The songs were not for him, but they were about everything he had lost, everything he had helped take from them. He was the ghost at their feast of memory. He began to dread the evenings. the sound of their singing as the sound of his own soul being flayed. He would retreat inside his cottage, cover his ears, but he could not block it out. It seeped through the walls, through the floorboards, a language of ghosts. One day, he was in the far field, mending a stone wall, his back to the path. He heard a footstep behind him and turned, expecting Silas. It was Kalen, the boy who had come back for him in the fire. He stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, his dark eyes fixed on Hale. He was holding something, a small carved piece of wood. "They call you a hero," Kalen said. His voice was clear and steady. He spoke the Viridian tongue perfectly, but with the subtle, lilting accent of the old tongue underneath, an accent Hale recognized as his own. Hale said nothing. He turned back to the wall, fitting a stone into place. "A hero doesn't stand at a gate and watch," Kalen said, his voice closer now. Hale's hands froze. The stone slipped from his grasp. He did not turn around. The sun beat down on his hunched back. "You spoke our words for them," Kalen continued, his voice relentless. "You told us to be quiet. You told us our names were wrong. You told us our songs were noise." Each word was a nail. Hale squeezed his eyes shut. He saw the face of the schoolmaster, a man with eyes like chips of flint. He heard his own voice, thin and hollow, translating the man's cruelties. "Your name is now John. Your name is now Mary. The stories of your people are pagan lies. You will learn the good book. You will speak the proper tongue." "Why?" Kalen's voice was no longer angry. It was a simple, devastating question. "Why did you help them?" Hale could not answer. Because he was a coward. Because he was alone. Because they had broken him first, and broken things are easily used to break others. He bowed his head, the shame a physical weight on his shoulders, pressing him further towards the earth. "We remember you," Kalen said softly. "Before the school. You were from the river clans. My grandmother knew your people. She said they were singers of the deep songs." Hale flinched. The deep songs. The songs of making and unmaking, the sacred heart of the tongue. He had not heard those words since he was a small boy, sitting at his own grandmother's knee. "Did you forget how to sing?" Kalen asked. He stepped forward and placed the small carved object on the wall next to Hale's hand. It was a bird, a river swallow carved with astonishing detail. The symbol of Kalen's clan, a gesture. Of what, Hale did not know. An offering? An accusation? Kalen said nothing more. He turned and walked away, leaving Hale alone with the bird, the sun, and the crushing weight of his past. The town's adoration and the children's judgment created a vice that was squeezing the life out of him. He retreated further. He stopped going into town altogether. Silas left his wages and supplies on his doorstep. He worked from before dawn until after dusk, burying himself in the physical labor of the farm. The dirt, the sweat, the ache in his muscles were a kind of penance. He let the soot from the hearth stain his skin, his clothes. He was trying to become one with the grime, to disappear into the earth. The hero of Viridian was receding, replaced by the hunched, silent creature he had been before. But now, he was haunted. He was a man living between two worlds, belonging to neither. He was the fire-stained cradle, a rescuer who smelled of smoke and guilt. The children's world, meanwhile, was expanding. They began to venture out from the preacher's garden. They did not play games of tag or hide-and-seek like the Viridian children. They moved through the landscape with a different purpose. They gathered herbs from the creek bed, stones from the river, feathers from the fields. They wove them into intricate patterns, laid them in circles at the base of old trees. They were mapping the world in their own language, re-sanctifying it according to their own traditions. The people of Viridian saw it as children's play, quaint and strange. Hale knew better. It was an act of survival, an act of power. They were taking the valley back, one stone, one feather at a time. Their songs grew stronger, more complex. They were rebuilding their oral history, right under the noses of their saviors. Hale would listen from his hovel, a prisoner to the beauty of what he had betrayed. He began to have nightmares of the fire, but in his dreams, he was not pulling the children out. He was holding the door shut, the heat of the knob blistering his palm, the sound of their old tongue songs burning on the other side. He became gaunt, a wraith haunted by sunlight. The limp in his leg grew more pronounced. The townspeople began to whisper. Their hero was wasting away. Perhaps the fire had taken more from him than they knew. They left food for him, but he rarely touched it. He was being consumed from the inside out. One evening, as twilight bled purple and orange across the sky, he was sitting in the dark of his cottage, staring into the cold hearth. He had not lit a fire in weeks. He could not bear the smell of smoke. The children's song began, a soft, mournful melody that seemed to be made of the fading light itself. It was a song he recognized, a deep song, a song of naming. He had not heard it since the day his own clan was scattered, the day he was put on the cart that would eventually lead him to the gray school. The song was a key, unlocking a part of him he thought had turned to dust. A sob, dry and ragged, tore from his chest. It was a sound of such profound grief that it felt as if it came from the earth itself. He curled into a ball on the hard floor, the tears he had held back for a lifetime finally coming, hot and useless. He wept for the boy he had been, for the man he had failed to become, for the children whose condemnation was a far heavier burden than the town's praise. He wept until there was nothing left inside him but a hollow ache. He must have slept. When he woke, the room was steeped in the deep, pre-dawn gray. The singing had stopped. The world was silent. He felt a presence in the room. He was not alone. He pushed himself up, his body stiff and sore. Standing in the faint light from the single window was Lirael, the youngest child, the one he had carried against his chest through the furnace. She was so small, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She was holding something in her hands, a cradle. A small, crude cradle woven from river reeds and soft moss, stained dark with what looked like soot. A fire-stained cradle. She held it out to him. He did not take it. He stared at it, his breath caught in his throat. It was a symbol from the old ways. When a life was saved from fire or water, a cradle was woven to house the soul, lest it wander, lost and frightened, from the shock of its near passing. It was a gift of profound meaning, an acknowledgement of the debt between the saved and the saver. Lirael took a step closer. She did not seem afraid of the gaunt, filthy man before her. Her eyes, deep and ancient, held no judgment, only a calm, unnerving clarity. She looked past the grime, past the hero's mantle, past the traitor's shame. She looked at him. He slowly got to his knees, so he was at her level. The movement sent a sharp pain through his leg, but he ignored it. He was transfixed by her gaze. She reached out her free hand, the one not holding the cradle. She did not touch his face or his hands, the parts the town had deemed heroic. Her small fingers went to the collar of his shirt and gently pulled it aside, exposing the scarred, ruined landscape of his back to the cool morning air. He shuddered. A lifetime of shame and pain held in that single patch of skin. He had never let anyone see it. He had never let anyone touch it. Her hand, impossibly soft, rested on the highest ridge of scar tissue, a mark left not by the church fire, but by the whip of the schoolmaster, a punishment for an act of defiance so small he could barely remember it. Defending one of the other children, perhaps, a failed, futile gesture. The touch was not one of pity, it was one of recognition. It was a cartographer's touch, tracing a map she already knew by heart. It was the price he had paid, a price they understood better than anyone. She leaned in close, her breath warm against his ear, and she whispered a single word. Not Hale, not Orvan, not hero or traitor. Tarion. His name. His true name. The name he was given by the river clans. The name that meant shield in the old tongue. The name he had not heard or spoken since he was 10 years old. The sound of it undid him. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was something more difficult and more profound. It was remembrance. They remembered him, all of him. The boy who was Tarion the Shield, the man who failed to be one, the ghost who stood at the gate, the monster who walked through fire. All of it was him. All of it was contained in that one whispered word. The fire-stained cradle was still in her other hand, an offering, the price of being remembered, the weight of their salvation, and his own. He looked from the cradle to her eyes, and for the first time since he was a child, he did not look away. The sun was rising, casting long shadows across the floor. In the quiet of the small, grimy cottage, a shield that had been broken for a lifetime finally began to feel the first, faint, agonizing possibility of being made whole. He slowly, with a trembling hand, reached out and took the cradle. It was heavy. It was impossibly heavy. And it was his to carry.